You got your mama's sunshine, you got your daddy's rain. You're like a piece of heaven in a hurricane. And it's bubbling over.
So I always start the podcast off with, hey, everybody, and I'm not going to do that today because I really feel like being different. I don't know what it is, but I just...
It's the weather. The weather's nice.
Is that what it is? I think that, sometimes in life you have a moment of awakening, and there's been a lot of things that have happened in my life this year that have they have pushed me forward. And in so many different ways I could have fallen backwards. When you stumble, when you make a mistake, or when life happens to you, it's so easy to fall backwards. But I chose to fall forward. And what I mean by that is I chose to fall into God, into the community, into purpose and all that. That has everything to do with what we're talking about today. I don't want to, gear this conversation in a way that's just my story, but I learned something very important. And this is where I think we're going to converge. With health, we've all agreed that there are three aspects of health, right? There's mind, right? And then there's your body, and then there's your soul or spirit. And, obviously the spirit's the most important thing because the spirit lasts forever. But what we do on earth matters, right? So then your body matters. And your mind is kind of how you, figure it all out.
The spirit's supposed to be the one in control.
Yeah.
And you go back to Adam and Eve, they were created body, soul, spirit.
Yeah.
And then through the sin in the garden, the spirit became disconnected.
Right.
And so ever since the Garden of Eden, we have needed a reconnection with the spirit.
Yep.
That communication to God. It's almost like if you wanted to picture in your mind a deep sea diver in the old days where they had the line that went up to the boat or whatever, that's been severed.
Definitely. I agree. And so my whole thought process on spiritual health comes down to, it's very similar than mental or physical, when you're born healthy. You're born healthy usually. Maybe there are times when you're not, and there are people that have had that. But there's a health when you're born. There's a lack of certain toxic elements when you're born, and it's not until these toxic elements are introduced into our bodies, in our minds, and our hearts that we start to go awry. Like what happens when you have a baby and you feed them? They grow. Right. Right. It just happens. I was in a store that you would have loved, Dad. The other day in Ventura, it was kind of a candy / magic store, right? They had whoopee cushions, which I bought one for the girls. My wife says the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
I started them on the whoopee cushions.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. But in that store, they had a little alligator, and it said if you put it in water, it grows. And that analogy of like if you just do what's right, there's going to be growth. And as our bodies stop growing, then we focus on our minds, right? And we should be focusing the whole time. But then it's mind and spirit, and there should be spiritual growth, right? And spiritual growth should just happen, but it happens when we're healthy. And being healthy has everything to do with elimination, with eliminating the things that make you unhealthy, right? Let me ask you this for all you guys, but what is it? What's the element or an element that people introduce into their lives that causes a toxicity or a disease spiritually?
There's a lot of elements, and I think that's what this whole broadcast is going to be about. But let's go back for a moment to what I said, creation. God created this body, or the flesh, breathed the breath of God, the Spirit of God, into that body, and the body combined with the Spirit became a living soul. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to talk about, I think today, at least that's the way I thought this broadcast was going to go. You came up with a topic.
Well, it made sense to me because I'm starting to believe that, if you have one aspect of health, there are a lot of healthy people, Tom, in the gym, physically healthy, but they may or may not be mentally healthy or emotionally healthy.
I was one of those guys.
Yeah, I mean,
I lived 34 years without knowing, having a knowledge of Christ. And so you can be in there and you can look like the epitome of health or wellness, or you got it going on, whatever words you want to
Right.
use.
Well-
But I'll go back to even just thinking about Romans chapter 7 with Paul. We got a spiritual guy that starts talking about the sinful nature of the body.
The flesh.
He talks about a war that wages inside him. And I think we can all identify with that, right? I think everybody's listening to our podcast identifies with the war that wages in your body, because he even said that the law gave me a realization that sin's not good.
Right.
But why do I find myself doing the things that I
hate.
don't want to do? And so, but
yeah,
isn't that
right.
I mean, that's
Romans
that
7, yeah.
that's that acknowledgement that, hey, we need that spiritual man to override the physical
Yep.
or the mental
Josh,
side of it.
I feel prompted to say this right now. And that is, there's some of you out there possibly listening that you don't believe in God. You say, hey, I like the health stuff. I like some of the stuff you guys have been doing. Please don't turn us off. Hear us out. You owe it to yourself. Just listen to us. Just, put up with us for a few minutes. So I just want to say that. Please don't turn us off here.
yeah.
Well, Pastor, if they did, it would be sad, because this is the real part of life that we're getting ready to talk about.
Yeah.
Well, and
Where
we're
it all
not.
happens.
What I love about our culture is we don't start with you better not do this or you better not do that or else. We start with, just like Jesus did, good news. In the chapter, first chapter of Mark, we see Jesus introducing a better way. He doesn't come on the scene and say, you guys are all messing up. You guys are all, you guys are gonna just ruin your lives. He comes on and says, hey, there's a better way. The kingdom of heaven is here.
Well, Josh, the very name gospel can mean hilariously good news.
Yeah.
I mean, the Bible's full of good news. You can be healed. You can hear God. You can have a better family. You can have a better a life all the way around. Now, that entails some suffering and stuff, because that's what makes character. That produces character, which in turn produces these good families and good marriages and whatever. There's a big, a big idea we need to talk about on this podcast right now. But let me start out with a question. I think this will get us going the right direction. What brought you to Christ? What made you want to live a Christian life? We were not born Christians. There had to come a point in your life where you said, I want to give my life to God. What brought you to Christ?
I can jump in if you don't mind, just right on this, is that I lived 34 years and I was very successful. My first career was in professional athletics. I made more money than I'll ever see again in my lifetime. But I had an 11-year marriage that went down the toilet because of my infidelity. But I realized this, there was a better way. I tell people I was screwed up. Tommy was screwed up. I just didn't know how to get unscrewed up. I could look in the mirror and just know this isn't the right way. And there had to be a better way. I knew that. And so not until I came in and I heard about the hilarious good news did I go, bingo, that's it. But I think if we talk about discipline in working out, discipline in dieting, and if we miss discipline of ourself, our body, then because self-control is a huge thing, right? I mean, we see a lot of people, and I don't care who you are, if you have no self-control, whether you're a spiritual-filled man or not, you're going to get off track. I mean, because your flesh, just like you said, Pastor, all the time, that few minutes of pleasure isn't worth the result.
And didn't Paul tell Timothy in the very vein of what you're speaking about? He said, discipline of the body is really good, but spiritual discipline is even better. You can't forget the spiritual discipline.
Yeah. Right? So if you're out there and you're just listening and you're saying, hey, I get it. I can look back on my life and I don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that there was a better path for me. That's why you shouldn't turn this off.
What's funny, Tom, is what you're talking about makes me think of one of the trips we took to Israel. And if you take a church sponsored trip to Israel, you're gonna go through the same route, right? They have a route that you go through, and everyone starts in Caesarea Philippi, and you walk through Caesarea Philippi, right on the beautiful place, right on the Mediterranean, and you see that the jails were right next to the arenas, right? And so they say that Paul wrote a lot of his words in jail. And so with that setup, and a lot of those different cities, and Paul was actually at Caesarea Philippi for a while, but a lot of those cities are kind of similar. So I think of this, Tom. Paul's sitting there in prison, and he hears all these roars from the crowd. He hears them cheering, and they're cheering on these athletes, these professional athletes, right? And us, and you had that, Tom. You had that, and us in America, like that, we value that above anything else. If you can be that guy, you have it.
Yep.
But then you have people who, what was that guy's name that committed suicide, and he went to jail. He just lost his mind. What was his name?
Was the kid that played for Florida State?
No, he played for Miami Dolphins. Hernandez.
Yes.
New England Patriots.
Yes.
New England Patriots.
Right.
Yeah.
And he played
So-
for Florida State too with Tim
Yes.
Tebow.
So he's a tragic story there, and they came out and said he had CTE, brain damage from the actual sport he played. But man, like so many of these guys, Tom Brady right now, I don't know him, but it seems like he's having a difficult time in life. You hear the headlines. There's got to be some truth to it, maybe not all, but these guys, they have everything in the world, but they don't have the thing.
And some of them
that
are the
they
most
need.
miserable people in the
Yeah,
world.
that's what I'm saying. And so Paul's writing these words, and he hears that, and he says, "No, there's a better way than that. There's a better thing than that." And he's in prison, and he's like, "I have the thing that they don't have. It's bigger, and it's eternal. It's forever."
You know what I like about Paul, because this I can identify with. Paul in Romans says, "For I know nothing good lives in me, that is in my flesh, my human nature, my worldliness." He says, "There's nothing good that lives in me." He says, "I'm following after my nature," and I think it's the Spirit that sets us free from our nature. And I think about my nature. I did what I did. I keep telling, I've told my wife, I told a lot of people, I go, I did what a young guy would do with too much money, too much time, and excess.
And through surrender, you found life.
Yeah. I mean, I learned the hard way that I didn't have the knowledge. I didn't have the right things. It may seem that way. But when I realized that, and then all of a sudden I heard how I could possibly get fixed, I go, I'm in on that.
Right, yeah.
I'm willing to self-discipline myself to get that because it's worth it.
Can I answer the
Sure,
question
sure,
too?
sure.
Because I don't even know if you've heard this, and you might have heard it. I came to God through exploring by myself in the mountains. Okay, that's my story, and I've never probably told you this, but you the part of your story was when I was little. You said that God spoke to you and said, "Let the boy explore, let him go out there." And it was during those times when I was in the woods by myself, not too far from the house, but in a place, there's mountain lions, there's real dangers out there. And when you're a kid, you feel fear. And it was in those moments where I felt like I wasn't alone. And I was like, there's something there. And then it wasn't until junior high that I actually made the decision. And then it wasn't until college that I actually got serious. But I just couldn't deny the reality of God's existence. Because he was with me. Like the scripture that stands apart for me is Psalm 23 that's spoken at funerals a lot. I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, but right? I'm walking through the same valley that you guys are all walking through. But, and it's a big but, I fear no evil. And the reason is not because I'm tough. This is David speaking. Not because he's killed lions and bears with his bare hands, because he was a tough kid. He fears no evil because God is with him.
Well, you go back again to creation. And Adam and Eve were created, body, soul, and spirit. And they were walking with God. And they were walking the way we've always been, created to walk. when they lost that spiritual nature, that's when the world went crazy. It just went off in a whole different direction.
And when I was young, Dad,
We've had that spirit restored to us
Sure.
now with our relationship with Christ.
and when I was young, and we've had this conversation many times, people don't realize that we talk candidly about these things. But when I was young, I saw a lot of hypocrisy in the church. You know, I saw people saying one thing and doing another, and there, that was just the culture back then. And so I had lots of reasons to leave the faith. But but the one thing that I couldn't shake was the fact that I just felt that, and I knew that God was with me.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? Let's go back to that again. Again, I want to just keep bringing us back to things we're saying that we might just skip over. But, I can't prove God to anybody out there, but I can prove him to myself. And I think it'd be safe to say that all of us sitting at this table have at some point proven the reality of God to ourselves. How many books have been written and such by educated men and women, possibly even, that have set out to disprove God and ended up accepting him in their study of whatever they needed to study to write the book. Lee Strobel rings a bell.
Yeah.
I just rebought a book that was in my library, but I lost, called Scientists Who Believe. 21 scientists tell their story about how they came to know that God was really real. And Frank Morrison wrote a book, Who Moved the Stone? And originally he had set out to disprove the resurrection of Christ. So I think that we have all proven that God is real.
Was it Strobel who wrote Evidence That Demands a Verdict?
No, that was Josh McDowell.
McDowell, okay.
It's funny when you say
Lee Strobel was a Case for Faith or
Case for Christ.
That's what it was.
But both of those guys have similar stories.
Similar stories.
Yeah, very interesting.
when you say you don't know if you can prove to somebody, but you've proven it to yourself. But I think back about, I've been with you when nobody's looking, when you buy food for others and you're showing Christ's love. And it's like, what makes you do that? Like, it isn't when no one's looking, when no one's with you, like, what is the thing that makes you want to go and put kids in your house and raise them because they have no families? What's the thing that motivates you to buy groceries for a single when no one's looking? You don't conjure that up. You don't that's not natural in you. That's not something you're born with. That's that's God in you. And so when you say you've proven it to yourself, but so many people, and through the ministry that you've created, Pastor, you've proven that just by being there for people. It's funny, my Christ story doesn't come from this like crazy moment I had in church. Obviously, I was there and I had a lot of moments in church, but it came from a lady that went to the church, and I was like the neighborhood chaos kid. I would go through the neighborhood, cause trouble, cause ruckus in the neighborhood. And I remember this one specific, the kid's name's Stevie. I know he won't mind me using his name. And he's actually back at the church going through one of our programs, which is so cool. I know, isn't that crazy?
That is cool.
He's back. And I remember he was yelling at a bunch. We were all on our bikes, and he was yelling through the fence some obscene stuff. And so I went over there and I saw his nose kind of creak through the fence. And so I kicked the fence in, busted his nose. So his mom ran down to our house, and she talked to my parents, like, we're gonna do all this stuff. They were mad. My parents are fighting with them. And she's like, you know what? I'm okay with all this. I just want him to come to church with me. So she told my parents. So my mom's like, you're gonna do that. You're gonna go to church. So after I kicked the fence on this lady's son, she says, the remedy here is for you just to go to church with me. So she brings me to this place called Valley Bible Fellowship and takes me, for whatever reason. No, I don't know what made her do it. We know why, but that's not natural. You hurt somebody else's kid, you don't take that person anywhere. You say, nah, She started taking me to church, and she just loved on me.
Where's that lady at today?
She's at her name's Donna, and she comes to our church still. Wow. And she's still there, sits in the, I see her every service.
She's probably blown away with your story.
Oh, she can't even, she just looks at me and go, like, God, why?
But I remember her well. She was such a sweet lady.
But what made her do that? It was God in her. It was her just being so simple, just showing God's love. And so I always tell people, like, I was able to see Christ not so plain, like opening the Bible. And yes, I've discovered who God is, but it was just her just being there. And that's so huge.
But let's say something about that.
Yeah.
God is spirit, the Bible says. Yeah. And we talked about it in a few podcasts back, that alcohol is also called spirits. And God influences you. When he's in your life, he's going to influence you all the time. God actually lives inside of us. When we do altar calls, that use that term for people that aren't church won't know what that means. But when we invite people at the end of the service to accept Christ, we do it in a very intentional way. We say, today you need to go back and ask God, Tell him you're sorry for the way you've been living your life. You want to live for him. Ask him to send his Holy Spirit and come and live in your body. And I tell people, I say, you're going to now walk out of this church today in a complete different manner than when you walked in. You're walking out with God in your body. You've never experienced that entire life. He's going to start influencing you. Just like when you get drunk with wine, it influences your actions. Once you receive the Lord into your life and the Holy Spirit, he's going to start influencing your actions. Now, there's good people out there that will do some of these things that we talked about without Christ in them, but he's going to be influencing us all the time. He's going to put a desire in our heart. I told people last Sunday or two, and I say it very often, what made you want to come to church today? I mean, didn't you have something better to do? It's God inside of you who's putting that desire in your heart. What makes you feel horrible when you sin? Not everybody's feeling horrible when they sin out there. What makes you feel horrible is the God inside of you. That's what's making you feel horrible.
I went to a certain gym years ago, and I think I told you about this. There was a guy in the gym who would just make random comments to me that were very rude, and I'm like, what's up with this guy? Like, and he was just very aggressively showing that he didn't like me, you know?
Right.
He would say things, he'd do things, he'd walk right by me, bump my shoulder. I'm like, what is going? And I'm not, in my mind, I'm not doing anything. I'm just there working out. And so I'm thinking to myself, what's behind this, right? And then that guy ended up getting saved at our church like a little while later.
Right.
So randomly, right? You actually talked to him. I don't remember, he's a blonde guy. I don't remember his name, but and it doesn't mean I'm not.
He didn't like you, but he liked me.
Well, at the end of the day, he was totally cool with me.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, why is it that when people find out, sometimes when people find out you believe in God, they're angry with you. They don't like you. There's a lot of tension there, and
Because
I think
they've had a bad experience.
That it could be that. It could be lots of things, but I think the ultimate reason is that they are experiencing the tension of knowing that they've never actually faced God without judgment. They've never actually like given him a chance.
One of my favorite sermons, and I've done it 2 or 3 times, is why not?
Yeah.
And I came to a place in my life where I lived in a very hypocritical Christian home. There's a lot of Christians out there, and we use that word hypocritical very carefully because we're all hypocritical, as you say, in some ways. But I say, I've coined this term. I never heard anybody use it. Unbelieving believers. There's a whole bunch of people out there they say, I'm a Christian, but they say they believe in prayer, but they never pray. They say they believe in the Holy Spirit, but they don't call upon him like I do, already 2 times today, because he's called your helper. Help me. They say they believe in sharing their faith. They never share their faith. I go on and on and on.
Well, so
I was raised in that home.
So not taking responsibility yourself and actually facing, the truth yourself is a big problem. But a lot of people do blame it on interactions they've had in the church.
Right.
Because it's easy. And they get angry at those people, and then they get angry at the church, and then they end up walking away from the faith.
And if you've had a bad experience, you get mad at people that you think are faking it.
Sure.
You go, come on. This is a bad experience all the way around.
Sure.
I mean, my whole perspective of what it was to be a Christian when I was growing up is I'd go to school. I couldn't dance when they had dancing in the class.
Right.
Yeah, I had to wear a note, Ronnie can't dance. I couldn't have a deck of playing cards, couldn't go to the movie show, couldn't drink, smoke, or chew, or go with those who do. That was the whole concept of what a Christian was. That was the whole concept.
Yeah,
and so I grew up hating it, despising the whole idea. And I was one of those, Josh. I made fun of Christians. I hated them. I was angry with them.
Well, it's
until
Jesus.
one day I said, I need to see if this is real.
Jesus said it well when he said the outside of the cup is clean, but the inside is dirty.
Yeah.
And in other words, it's pointless. Those things you're doing are pointless if you haven't done the work.
Can you be spiritually healthy if you haven't come to a conclusion that God is real? See, in Hebrews, it says that those who come to God must believe that he is and that he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him.
I think you can begin the process. So what I've observed over the years is a strength that has happened in our church. And sometimes I think we forget this, but we have a mentality of come as you are, right?
Right.
And that means come high, come drunk, come, we don't want you making an issue. But I think of Brian Welch, and he's shared the story many times. He got saved at our church in the front row, and he says he was high. And of course he was. we believe this. I was with him when he threw his last I think it was meth. He threw it away. He
Flushed it down the toilet.
Yeah. Probably not the best thing. But anyway, he got rid of it the last time I saw him do this, and he's been clean ever since. So as far as I know, but he came as he was, and then we just accepted him, and then God changed him over time.
Yes.
But it didn't happen overnight.
No.
I mean, there was a change overnight, but there was also Brian was still Brian.
Yeah.
We took him straight to Israel after that. I'll never forget that trip because it was a trip.
He made the trip for us.
Yeah. So he saw some monks and asked where can I get one of those robes? Somehow he found a monk robe. So he's wearing a monk robe. He's in the bus, but he's sitting in the very front seat, like the very front seat that people don't normally sit in, like right by the door.
Right.
And he's just sitting there writing a song to 50 Cent. And he was like,
You know what's funny when
Jumped right in.
we were walking, I believe, up on the Mount. Mount of Carmel, I think.
Yeah.
And we passed some of these monks.
Yeah.
They had robes on. He says, "Hey, where do I get one of those robes?" And I really played him. I said, "Go ask them. They'll tell you where." And I knew I was going to have him come back and said, "They're mean. They're really mean, man. Those are rude dudes, man." But he found one somewhere. He found one.
He saw the bad side of religion, religious attitude right away, because while he was there and he's tattooed from head to toe, and there's some religious Jewish people that came to him and they're like in his face. And then
we
got in your
passed one.
face.
No, they got in my face. Oh,
Yeah.
we had it out.
Yeah.
We were walking down a very narrow hallway in one of the cities, and they saw him. And I think it was one of the guides, Jewish guide. "Oh, the tattoos got to go. They just got on Brian.
Yeah.
And so Brian looked at me and I said, "Hey, I'll be right back." I went over and got in that guy's face. I said, "How come you're not shaving? Where's your sideburns? Where's your sideburns? I don't see any sideburns here." And me and this guy got into it, man.
Right.
I said, "You're a bigger hypocrite,
You're
dude. You're a bigger hypocrite."
You're going to follow one of the laws.
That's a funny thing, because I was thinking about the scripture in John 15 when Jesus says, "Abide in me. I'm the vine, you're the branch." And you read that and you start thinking, about Jesus being the vine and the branch, and you interject yourself in that story really fast.
Right.
And really, he's talking about the Jewish people. Like, if you go back to the Old Testament, when he talked about the vine, Israel was the vine. You go back all the way into the Old Testament. It's the same word here, vine, that he's basically talking to the Jewish people. He's saying, "I'm the vine, you're the branches."
Right.
And
you'll
if
be
you don't abide in
if you don't abide in me, but they were
And
so caught. But they were
so much of an offense to them.
Right, it was so much of an offense. But we read it, and we try, but it was for the Jewish people, and
So offensive.
and they were trying to keep that old law
Well,
and do all this religious
it turns
stuff
out that
was so important to them.
It
And
turns out that Jesus came on the scene to offend the religious people,
Right.
And what happened? They killed him for it.
but
right?
think about that, because when we think about spiritual health, we think about all these.
That's not the whole reason he came. Right.
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 Right. But when we think about religion, we think about all these spiritual rules, all these things that we have to do, right? If you don't do it like this, you don't do that. You have tattoos, you don't have tattoos, blah, blah, blah. And we think, well, if we do all these things, we're going to be spiritual healthy.
Right. Well,
and really, that's not.
Let me say
that's
this.
not the premise.
Let me say this, and I get fired up about this, and I know that there's certain people in the audience that have written reviews that want to hear you guys more. But
Yes.
somebody said that the old guys know the words much more than the young guys. I'm like, yeah, they've done it longer. So anyway, but
we still love you. If you wrote that review, we
yeah, we can talk anyway.
It's funny too. If you're out there and you wrote that, there's a system to this podcast.
Right.
Okay, you tell them the system.
Yeah. Well, the way I believe this has happened. This is Pastor Ron's podcast, so he's a pilot. Josh is a co-pilot, and Vince, you're the stewardess. You have to make sure everything goes. And I'm just the passenger. So I'm just here to comment.
Peanuts. Who needs peanuts?
You're the non-gender.
I'm okay with it.
Stew.
I'm the elevator
They
noise.
call them stews.
I'm the elevator music.
We're good.
You're just
so you
there.
know,
You're in the
they're-
background.
They're called stews now, not stewards
Oh,
or
okay.
stewards.
I'm sorry. That shows you how old I am.
Words change.
I'm kidding. I don't care. But my point was that not that Jesus came just to offend. He came to eliminate a barrier that men had created that was actually keeping the actual people from accessing God.
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And that's why Jesus flipped the tables in front of the temple,
Right.
because that was a barrier for the average. That was where the people, the common people, that's where they worshiped, because they couldn't go into the temple.
But Jesus wasn't what they expected.
Right.
Wasn't what the religious people expected.
It wasn't what they wanted.
No, VBF is not what religious people expect. Jesus was a revolutionary. And, you know, if he came back to the earth today, many of the religious traditional churches would kick him out.
Right.
They'd have nothing to do with him.
Yeah.
And I think I've said it before, and I keep repeating it, and that is, you know, I hate religion. I'm sorry, gang, but I hate it. But man, I think it's the coolest thing in the world, following Jesus.
Yeah.
That revolutionary
And following
Son
Jesus,
of God, carpenter. I mean, that is so cool.
And I've always thought about this, like people that don't go to church, hearing people that run a church say that we hate religion is confusing for them. But what you mean, I know you mean this, is that you hate just showing up and checking off the boxes and then having an attitude, all that stuff that comes with
When
it.
I say religion, what I'm referring to is a system of good works
Yep.
to approve
Yeah.
ourselves to God.
Yeah.
This thing where we go in and we have the organ music
Yep.
and we recite some things. We
Yep.
never really get into people's lives.
Yep.
We never really go out in the streets
Yeah.
and feed people. We don't go out to the orphans.
Okay, so check it out. I have a new appreciation for what you did in 1975. Okay. No one gave you permission, right? No one said, yes, you should do this. Even your own father,
My own family.
your whole family said,
You're crazy.
You're a fool for doing this.
You didn't go to seminary.
Didn't
Right.
go to seminary.
Didn't go to seminary, didn't follow the rules. And back then there was no other path, but you made a path. You said, no, I'm just going to love these people and see where it goes. And now there's a church of 10,
Well, let's go back
15,000,
to that for a
20,000
moment.
people, right?
You know, again, I was raised in a very hypocritical atmosphere.
Yep.
My dad said he loved God, but he yelled and screamed at us. He didn't practice the things of the faith at all. My mom did love Jesus. But
And if you saw just him and his bad behavior, right?
I never would have became a believer.
Then you wouldn't have, yeah,
I
exactly.
would have went the opposite way.
And that's what I think Jesus is talking about when he says better for you to tie a millstone around your neck and just throw
But they
yourself in the water.
implanted enough truths in my heart by making me go to church. I heard enough things that when life did hit a critical moment,
Mm-hmm.
I said, now I got to find out if you're real. My family has not shown me that. But let's go back.
Well, our goal is not for people to see the church, but to see behind the curtain.
Well, let's go back
And
to what you said. Let's go back to what you said. You know, I gave my life to God. I proved to myself that he was real and that Jesus was somebody I wanted to follow. And lo and behold, you know, God gave me a vision one day. I've never had a vision since. I mean, I was just doing my thing, trying to learn about Jesus the best way I could, try to live the best I could like he lived. And one day, after I'd been saved for a couple of years, I was praying about what church I should go to. I was a youth minister or youth pastor, or youth leader. I was leading about 10 or 12 teenagers. And the church we were in, where I was leading them at, it fell apart because of hypocrisy. They kicked me out of the church because they said I taught things that wasn't relevant to what they had been raised to believe. And long story short, I just went to prayer one day. I said, God, where do I go to church at and take these young people with me? And I had a vision. I mean, that's the only way you can say it. I saw a big screen. I saw myself hanging a sign in front of some old Quonset hut, and I heard this voice say, start a church for me. Now, I was just not smart enough, I guess, according to some people's standards, to know that wasn't God. It was simple. I saw some. I didn't know if somebody spiked my coffee with something. I saw a picture, and I was childlike enough to follow it.
And would you even say that you were ready at the time?
No, I didn't even think about being a pastor. It wasn't even on my mind. I just thought, well, we'll start a church, and these 10 teenagers. Well, I said, we'll start a church. After I saw his vision, let's go back. That
No,
just
no.
messed
No,
everything
you're
up.
good. You're good. You're good. Keep going.
No. All I did, a Quonset hut. I was shown a picture of it in what I think was a vision. And I heard a voice in the vision say, go start a church for me. I had never heard of anybody in the whole world doing that. I didn't know that was even possible. But I knew I heard a voice, saw a picture.
And again, you're not bragging. You're telling a story.
No, I'm
and
telling a
this
story.
story is important because
And so, Josh, I knew that this Quonset hut I'd seen in my mind existed. I knew it was on Nile Street. And again, I didn't know any better. So I said, God, if this picture, this crazy thing that's happened in my head is from you, if it's from you, then confirm it by putting a for rent sign on this building. I know vaguely where it's at, and I'm going to go look at it today. And I told your mother, I said, I think I've had a vision. I don't know what a vision is. I haven't had one since. And so I said, I asked God if this is of him, there'll be a for rent sign on this old Quonset on Nile Street. And I drove down there, and it was raining that day, and there was a big old for rent sign that had went up the day before. The guy who had been renting it had died in a motorcycle accident, and they put it up for rent. It was old Quonset. If you can see a picture of it, just a building with some tin, and it was horrible. No chairs, nothing.
Yeah, this wasn't some epic church plant,
No.
beautiful building.
So
Yeah,
the reason
yeah.
the reason that this story is very important to us, and it is very important to us, okay?
Right.
We've talked about it a lot.
Yeah.
The reason it's important to us is because there was a shift happening in the church. There was a cultural shift happening
Yes,
in the
yes,
church.
yes.
There was a young group rising up, and they needed something different. And you and a couple other people, Chuck Smith was doing it down south, right? Which, by the way, there's a movie coming out about Chuck Smith and Lonnie Frisbee, which I think you might be interested.
I can't
in
wait to
watching.
see it.
Anyway, but during that time, there was a rebellion,
Right.
coming out of the 60s and 70s. You had a bunch of hippies, and all of a sudden, you have hippie Christians that are like, "We're gonna just be like Jesus," right?
Well, Josh,
And so-
I was in the traditional church, and I had a hunger to serve God. I didn't want to be a pastor. I didn't want to be a minister. I just wanted to serve God. I had proved to myself that God was real, and I want everybody to know that.
And so the reason that the reason it's important to us now is because the same thing's happening right now.
It is.
There's a shift.
But let me
happening right now.
finish this.
Yep.
So what happened? I just want everybody to know God was real. So our traditional church we was at, it was Assembly God Church. They had lost their youth pastor, and I said, "Hey, I'll work with the youth. Let me do it." They had about 15 youth or whatever. I started taking them to a park. We started singing songs, and we started talking about prophecy and all this stuff. And they grew from 15 to 25 to 35 to 45 to 50. I had all these kids. And then I was getting excited. I go, man, this is cool. And one day the pastor came to me and said, "Hey, we have hired a new youth pastor, so thank you, but we don't need you anymore." It crushed me. I go,
Right.
we were just growing. We were getting excited about God. We were going out doing door-to-door witnessing. Man, and he said, "You can't lead our youth anymore." I said, "Okay, so you're not qualified. You're not a
Wow.
real youth pastor."
Yeah.
And so I went, and that's when God gave me this vision. And so we go down this Quonset, looked inside, and we said, "We're going to have church Sunday." I had 10 teenagers that I was working with that was left out of the group, 10. And so I said, "We don't have any chairs." So we started praying. We went and got some bar stools. Somebody gave us some. They gave them to us out of their kitchen. Somebody else had some loungers that you laid out in your backyard with. And we had a bench we found somewhere. We put it all in there. Didn't have a microphone, nothing. No musicians.
Yeah.
And we had our first church service. We had enough for 10 teenagers to sit on.
What other rules? Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
Now, I had no intention of being a pastor. I just wanted to have a place we could meet and talk about God. And so as 10 teenagers, we grew to 15 teenagers, 20. Pretty soon this Quonset hut, if you could have seen it, there was a standing room only.
Yeah.
Everybody's standing in this Quonset hut. Because I was saying, "You know what God did yesterday? And God showed me this." Now, at this point, I didn't dream of becoming a pastor. We were just excited about swapping God stories. And it turned into this mega church.
Would you say that a lot of people, even including myself, would you say that a lot of people make it so much more complicated than they have to?
Way more complicated.
Like you weren't ready, but you had the right heart, and you just said, I'm gonna share God's love with these people. And that was it.
Josh, again,
That was
Right.
it.
No, right.
because no one had ever heard of people pioneering churches. I mean, again, every Sunday, what I do, I said, "Well, let's have it like a church service." And I wrote only 3 Christian songs I knew by heart down on cardboard, and I'd hold them up.
So
And I'd say,
awesome.
"When I get to heaven, gonna walk with Jesus. When I get to heaven, gonna see his face." And we would sing those songs. And then I would tell them my God stories. That was church.
But you were rich, right? You got immediately rich, and it was super easy, and there was no struggle
it
in
was
it.
so easy. I mean,
He's joking.
I'm
He's
just
joking
I'm just
about
saying,
the fact.
I'm just
that-
saying a lot of people
yeah.
think, oh, you started church because you were in for
you had to make
wealth and
yeah.
whatever. I'm just saying you probably were like, how am I going to make my bills? How are we going to make the church building bills? How are
well,
we?
I was working.
Right.
I was working for Hearts Mountain.
Right.
I was delivering dog leashes
Right.
and
how many-
doggy breath
Right.
sprays. I was doing that, and I
Right.
had no intentions of going to ministry.
right.
No intentions.
Right.
And then, so anyway,
I
long
think I'm
story
going to follow
short,
in his footsteps.
Huh?
I think I'm going to follow in
You're,
his
you're gonna
footsteps.
sell dog spray?
Maybe.
I see it. But no,
Or even
but I'm just saying. I think a lot of people,
baby
your
rice.
story.
I
is
worked
so,
full time, 40 hours.
Your story's so interesting because I think a lot of people, they might see where you're at now, but they don't see that you put this because you believed in it so much that you had to, and you cared for people so much that you put this grind in. It wasn't that all of a sudden you open this church or this Quonset hut and people were paying your bills and all this. It was a lot, wasn't
And
it?
haven't you heard that story over and over and over? Like people that are successful are like, I just did it.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't
No.
mean, I was working full time. And one day I'm delivering my dog chains and doggy breath spray and my doggy bones. And I'm in
I love
something called
this.
Skaggs Drugstore. And I vaguely knew about this pastor. His name was Tom. No offense, Tom. He's a different Tom. And this guy was known to be a bold radical for Christ. And so I'm in there and he sees me. He says, Ron Vietti, you started a church, haven't you? And I said, well, I guess it's a church. Me and some teenagers meet every week. And he says, how big are you? I said, we're about 30 of us now. And he said, why don't you go full time? Full time what? Why don't you lead these kids full time? I said, well, I got to work. I got to have money. He said, let me pray with you. And right there in the middle of the drugstore, he prayed real loud. He goes, Father God, today I'm coming to you with my brother. I was embarrassed, man. He prayed forever. It went on forever. I could hear shopping carts coming down the aisle and turn around going the other way. And I'm going, what? But after that, I realized God confirmed it 3 more ways. So I want you to go full time leading these 30 people or whatever, 40. And I said, how am I going to do that? And we had a little bit of money in the bank. And so I started out making $650 a month. That's what I made. And I quit my job. And I started devoting to all of these kids. And then one day I was asked to do a funeral and a guy called me Reverend. He's Reverend? And he didn't get my attention. I was looking somewhere else. Reverend. I was looking, Reverend. I go, oh, you mean me? I'm a Reverend? He
That's
said, yeah,
funny.
Reverend, we got to go do graveside now. And so anyway, long story short, I don't know how we got off on that.
No, this is good because I think
Well,
this all has to do.
This has a lot to do with everything.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people, they like we talked about overcomplicating it. You didn't overcomplicate it. You knew that you wanted to do more. You had the way we talked about earlier. You had this feeling inside you, and you didn't conjure it up. You didn't make it up. It was God already saying stuff to you, and you acted on that stuff. And it was so simple, and simple in the sense of that you just obeyed it. Not simple that you had to make sacrifices and all those things. But that's huge because a lot of people, I feel like sometimes, and I'm not saying all churches are churches, but sometimes there can be it can seem like overwhelming and a lot. Like if you don't do all these things, you don't commit to all this stuff, then you're gonna miss out on God.
I'm just gonna presume here that when you were in that grocery store delivering pet food,
man.
you might have been a little down.
Well, yeah, I was down.
Right.
I wanted so badly to go out and tell my God stories to everybody every day.
Yeah.
I had this desire, and I didn't determine that it was to be a pastor, but I just wanted, everywhere I went, I was having these God stories, little stories, big stories. I knew that he was real, and I wanted the whole world to know, hey, he's really real.
Right.
I know you guys don't know this, but he's really real. He'll really hear your prayers. He'll really talk to you. That just turned me on and stoked me. I wanted everybody to know that.
I think that everybody has those moments that you realize maybe God was chasing you. I do a lot of fitness motivational speaking now. And I shared this story because some people asked me a question. So when you're in bodybuilding, you had no knowledge of God. I says, well, there was an instance. I was one of 3 guys that we had a bodybuilding manager. There was nobody else. And I remember Joe Weider one time asked me, Tom, what does Marty do for you? So the guy's name was Marty Demersion, and he had a business called International Sports Management. He took a chance, which was a bad chance, on 3 of America's rising stars, top names, and I was one of them. And he had a guy named Gary Stridham, who was South Africa, Barry DeMay, who was from Denmark, and me. And so Marty managed us. We made a lot of money because if we didn't make money, Marty didn't make money. So Gary and Barry and I were talking, and we were realizing that Gary, Barry, and I were talking.
You need to write a book, Tom.
Gary, Barry, and I.
Yeah.
Gary, Barry, and I.
And Gary and Barry are still in the industry. And they went way farther than I did. But we were talking about we weren't doing weird stuff anymore. Seriously. we were just talking, and I remember, I think it was Gary said, Tom, have you seen Marty lately? And I'm in California, Gold's Gym Venice.
What do you mean by weird stuff?
When I say weird stuff, bodybuilding broke onto the scene after pumping iron, and everybody wanted muscles. Movies, commercials, magazines, everybody wanted muscles.
So offbeat stuff.
Yeah, it would be the weird stuff that you would probably not put your kids around.
Got it.
So there was the industry just didn't know where it was going.
I read you.
So as I was saying weird stuff, we just didn't show up to the that's it.
Right.
We got it.
So I went to the gym at Gold Gym Venice, and Marty was picking me up for a business meeting, and I jumped into his red Corvette, and I sat there, and I go, hey Marty, I go Gary and Barry and I have been talking, and Gary and Barry, if you're still out there, you're much better bodybuilders than me, and I go, what's up with we're not, we don't mind it because we're working a lot and we're making money, but we're not doing the weird stuff anymore. And Marty looked at me and says, Tom, I can't have you guys around that because I've accepted Jesus Christ in my life.
Wow.
And I looked at Marty and I go,
Wow.
oh. He goes, would you like to know about Jesus? I go, no. Where we're going to eat. but it was funny that God had invaded my.
But that stuck with you.
Oh, it did. Yeah. And I don't share that at church.
I love that because that day a tiny seed was planted.
It was because I noticed.
Right.
God had something to work with.
Three of us were going, what's going on?
Where'd the weird stuff
he
go?
Probably thought, man, that didn't work.
Yeah.
But then Jerry came in.
And Larry.
And Jerry and Larry.
So it
Right,
was just,
right.
I mean, you're in a macho profession, you're in a macho business, and God can come knocking on your door.
That's
And as I look backwards, because it wasn't for another 7 or 8 years before I got saved.
I do think we should have a full episode on Tom telling his stories from bodybuilding days.
They wouldn't
love
be,
this.
Stop doing the weird stuff.
They wouldn't be
Episode
appropriate.
1.
Does that involve coffee enemas?
Yeah. No, that was like you guys had to do that.
Yeah, well, coffee enemas you did so
Get
you
off
could.
base here, but
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, maybe that'll chase away our audience. They lost me at that point.
Well, real quickly, I would say to be spiritually healthy, the first component is you got to know God exists.
Yes.
And once you know He exists, it will change your life.
Yeah.
But the second one is you got to take this holy book called the Bible and learn what it teaches.
Oh, man.
For example, people are blown away. Okay, go
Can I
ahead.
just add something to
Sure.
knowing he exists?
Okay.
I think it's like surrendering to the fact that he does.
Yes.
Because I think everyone knows deep
I don't know.
down.
I don't know.
I don't know either, but I've that's my
I
experience.
didn't think he existed. Before I got
really
saved, I
didn't.
did not.
But
I
you
did
grew
not.
up in church, so
I
you
grew up in
just thought
church, but I saw such a bad example.
it was all
I
BS.
really thought that God was somebody's, cosmic ray in the sky that they had made up because they were weak people and they had to believe in heaven. And I really did not believe He existed.
Fair enough. Yeah.
I've tried this with the Pastor Ron. I didn't think anything ill of it. When Marty said, hey, we'd like to know Jesus, I didn't know anything about Jesus. I wasn't raised in church, so I didn't know that. So there was no ill intent. I mean, I was just like, no, I don't want to know him. So I didn't have a bad feeling about it.
Yeah.
I just wasn't
Well,
exposed to it.
and that attitude is the attitude many people have today. They're like, cool.
Yeah.
Let's go back to believers that are listening to us today. Now, he won't remember saying that sentence. He won't remember it, but you did.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? I'm telling you, you have to plant seeds and
You
give
do.
God something to work with.
Yeah.
That little sentence he said to you stuck to
You
your
did.
ribs,
I
your
can't-
spiritual
I
ribs.
can't do that because
Yes.
Yeah.
I can't have you guys around that.
Well,
It's
let's go back. Once you know God exists, He's chased you down, you let Him find you, given your life to Him, then you have to start learning what the Bible teaches. I tell people all the time, the Bible's real. It even says in the Bible that sin is pleasurable for a season. I mean, come on. That's honesty. That's
Right.
truth.
Right.
I've said it, and I don't want to be redundant, but sin's like a package deal. You get, 2% pleasure, and you get 98% of crapola.
Mm-hmm.
And
So
so,
true.
So we got to know what the Bible teaches. What does it teach about marriage? What does it teach about raising good kids? What does it teach about getting rid of stress? What does it teach about angels and demons that really exist while we're talking out there? They are really real entities. What does it teach about all this stuff?
Can I go back to recognizing God is, or that God exists? Like,
Okay.
Do you think it's possible for people? I'm asking this question. For people to, like, I think some people still would say, "Oh yeah, I believe God exists." Like, if you ask, maybe if you polled people today, maybe like 50% of people said, "Yeah, God exists," and then some people would say they wouldn't. But do you think there's another step just saying, "Well, God exists"? Do you think it's even further that they have to recognize God in their life?
Yes, definitely. Oh, there's two
Because I
steps.
think, because
You
I
did say
think,
that was
because
the first part. Yeah.
no, right. Because I think there's like people, like they think, well, God is real,
Yeah.
but there's not
But
like.
what does he
real-
have to do with me?
But what does he have to do with me? Right? 'Cause
the devil knows he's real.
Right.
Right.
Well, the word says that, but I think a lot of people would say, like you said, Josh, a
James,
lot of
yeah.
people, like God's real, or God exists, or there is a God, but they fail to see and make it simple just to see God
Ja-
moving in their
That
life.
reminds, me of that reminds me of James real quick, because you were talking about that. If he was here, he would say, "Hey, do you believe in God?" And they would be like, "Yeah." He's like, "That's great. So does the devil. So do demons. So you're at
Right,
base
right,
level
right.
right
Even
now."
they shudder.
The book of James.
But yet
you
you're
got to
right.
be a doer of the word, not just a hearer.
But you're right about the fact that that is the first step, but then there is a second.
There's a second step.
and a
Right.
third, and a fourth, and a
You got to
fifth.
believe that he exists and that he's a rewarder of those who diligently
And another
seek
thing
him.
that I appreciate about you, Dad, and where you started and where you are now, is you've always been somebody who's growing. You never stopped growing.
Yes.
And I think
Oh my gosh.
when you cement your theology, when you put it in a concrete box, what that's saying to everyone is, I'm the smartest person you know. I'm the smartest one, and I know everything, which is not true.
Right.
Instead, and we're not talking about changing the Bible. We're not talking about changing God's plan. We're saying that we are lifelong learners of what this actually means.
Well,
right?
guys, as we even talk about, I love what Pastor Ron says. You have to go to the Bible to know the truth. But in Galatians, it says you are running well. Who has interfered or prevented you from doing the race? So there is a consistency that you have to keep up, right? I mean, you got to keep learning, because we can all get off track, right?
There's stuff I've learned this last year or two that I didn't know when I was 50, 60 years old. I didn't know it.
Right.
I'm always learning.
Oh.
And part of my preaching at VBF on Sundays is I've got a hold of something this week that I've never seen before.
Yeah.
Whoa, you got to hear about this. And I
So-
think that's why we're growing. There's a spirit of excitement there, but we're learning. We're still learners.
Can I share a little, kind of an anecdote? I always get that word mixed with antidote, but anecdote. I was thinking about spiritual health this morning as I knew we were doing this podcast, right? And I was thinking about when I was younger and I used to walk along the river, and we used to, that was fun. We would go to the river, Tule River, and we'd run and round and fish and stuff. And there was lots of rocks. And so when you'd see a boulder, you'd have to, go around it or whatever and appreciate it. But what if I just started collecting those big rocks, and I said, okay, there's a rock. I'm gonna hold that one. That's how I'm gonna clear the path. And then you grab another one. I'm gonna hold that one. That's how I'm gonna clear the path. And then all of a sudden you're just holding all of this weight. I think what happens in our spiritual walk is we pick up things that were never meant to be picked up. And we add things that were never meant to be added. That's why I'm not a huge proponent in getting too into like a book that was written by, somebody else. I like to stay anchored to the Bible. And I like to make sure that's my anchor, and then I'll read another book, but then, I don't make a life philosophy on that, because that's what somebody else saw in God. But instead I try to stay to the source. And I think that we pick up bad habits. We pick up religious, all in attitudes. That's something that bothers me.
Right.
The church has an all in attitude. If you don't do it just like me, then you're out.
Right.
You don't belong here.
Right.
And that's not right. That's not true. You've enabled us, whether you're realizing or not that you created a monster, a good monster. You've enabled us to read it ourselves and to learn ourselves and to connect with God ourselves. And that has been the most freeing thing that's ever happened. I'm not picking up the rocks. Instead, I'm walking around them,
Right.
and I'm observing them,
Right.
and I'm
But
seeing
we
them.
let God be God. For example, when you were born, and my whole life's God stories. I just told somebody a God story yesterday. I told them one last week. God is always moving in my life. But when your mother became impregnated, it was before the time where we had the ultrasounds and could see. We just didn't do those kind of things. And the doctor listened to the heartbeat, and I already had a daughter, and he said, it's another girl. And I said, oh man, I wanted a boy. I've been praying for a boy. I want one of each. And long story short, when we were trying to decide what we would name our child, I was convinced it was a boy. And God told me, name him Joshua, because he'll be a deliverer of my people. And he ordered me to name you that. I already had a Joshua in the family, and I didn't want to name you that, but he told me to. And so when you were born, and I knew you would be a deliverer of God's people. And so I want to go back to the point. You told me, Dad, I don't want to go in the ministry. I'm not going to the ministry. But what did I do? I didn't try to convince you. I prayed, and I kept praying. And it's called, the Bible says if you knock, keep on knocking and don't stop knocking, you're going to get it. And I knew it was God's will already. I knew it was God's will. So you'd say, and I want to get this knocking noise going here. It might be kind of annoying, but I'm knocking. And you say, Dad, I'm not going to ministry. I'm no way. And I just smile. I say, we'll see. And Dad, I'm not going to ministry. Years later, we'll see. And then later on, well, if I did go in the ministry, and I just keep smiling, but I let God do it.
Yeah.
I didn't do it. I let God do it.
Well, there's a lot for me to say about that, but that's probably another conversation at another time. What I believe is, and I still believe,
You don't have to be a pastor. You can ministries.
To the same point is just
multiversal.
I was always fighting my this feeling of having to fit into this mold that everyone expected me to fit into. And obviously I haven't done that, and I'm not even started. I'm going to continue moving forward, but I was just recently I've been freed of realizing, I mean, I don't have to do things exactly the same way everybody else did. And if I do, it's probably wrong. Right. And if you would have went to seminary and put a suit on, and you would have, it would have been wrong.
Wrong.
And so I'm in the same boat right now where I'm going through a shift, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I haven't spoken in a year. I haven't really been. I'm on the website as creative director, not pastor, and I'm trying to answer a lot of questions. And so.
But you're ministering today.
But at the end of the day,
you don't have to be a quote unquote pastor in the pulpit.
At the end of the day,
Amen.
I said, and I'm still saying yes to God.
Amen.
And that's never going to change.
And you're going to be a minister all your life.
Amen.
It might be in a different capacity.
Yeah.
Rather than send me to seminary,
Yeah.
should just give me a white robe and let me off in the mountains for 3 years, and I would come back trained.
Right.
Spend time with God.
Yeah, I mean, Tom and I were even talking about that mold thing earlier.
I think people get too twisted up.
If the crowd cheers you on and says, yes, you're doing it right, you're probably not doing it right.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, that's probably potentially.
When it comes to following God is what I mean.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
because God will lead you on a path where people are like, what are you doing?
Right.
Of course, we have to have people.
Everyone cheered the prophets on, right?
No.
Right? That's my point.
But we're talking about being spiritually healthy today. So I say the first component of being spiritually healthy, is to prove to yourself God that exists. That God exists.
Yeah.
The second thing is learn what the Bible teaches. The third thing is put into practice what you learn in the Bible.
That's good.
And then the fourth thing is get in a community of other believers.
And I would add another thing: just be yourself. God didn't make a mistake; He made you as you are. Right?
I heard you say this one time, Pastor, and I've always done it. There's a spiritual checkup in the Bible. It's in Galatians chapter 5. It says you can walk in the flesh. But when you do, here are the list of things that will probably happen, and they're all bad. Then it says, but you can also choose to walk in the Spirit, and the Spirit will lead you to do better things.
What's interesting about
and
that,
it's your choice.
And what's interesting about that is, like, we live in a society right now that's obsessed with freedom, and we're like, we want our freedom. And there's people that have different ideas of how to get that freedom.
Yeah.
Right. But really, if you walk in the Spirit, you would be much more free than if you go and do things just like everyone else and end up in the same.
And let's explain to our audience what we mean by walking in the Spirit. Again, we believe that when we get born again, we come to a point in life where we say, God, I'm tired of living life my way. I want to give my life to you, and I'm going to live with you eternally. So send your Holy Spirit down and come into my body and live inside of me. Now, that is just too crazy for words. You can't wrap your mind around that. The Spirit of God comes into your body and lives in you. When we say walking in the Spirit, what we mean is that He produces influences in us. We obey them. He puts desires in our heart. The Bible says He actually puts desires in our heart. And we're to follow those. And when we follow those supernatural desires in our heart, we're walking in the Spirit.
I don't know if I'm remembering this right, Tom, but in Galatians 5, it says, maybe 16, I'm not sure if it's what the verse is, but it says, walk by the Spirit and you will not
Carry out the desires of the flesh.
Carry out, right?
Yes.
But it doesn't say that you won't have them.
No.
Right.
No.
It doesn't say that you won't think certain thoughts or want or be, because there's a magnetic pull to go south, to do things differently, to do things, or to do things your way, or to be selfish.
We'll always be tempted.
Right.
Always.
But if you walk by the Spirit, you won't.
And
carry them
temptation
out,
is not a sin.
Right.
Just yielding to it.
But a lot of people think it is.
But see, that's because they don't know the Bible.
Yeah.
And to be spiritually healthy, you have to know the Bible.
And they don't know Galatians I think it's 5:1. It's one of my favorite verses. That's how well that's it's funny when I never know the address of verses, but it is for freedom that Christ set us free, and people don't realize that and the truth behind that. And Jesus also said the truth will set you free, and so the truth is that God exists and He's pro-human. He's for you. He wants you to live, a good life and to spread His love. And if you don't, if you don't do that, He's giving you the choice.
Right.
He's giving you the choice. That's the thing too, is people are like, how come you don't care that this person's doing this or doing that? Because I'm not that person.
He says, I've created you. I've created you. I know all about you. I know what makes you work. And he says, in my Bible, you will read quite a few things
right.
that I call sin. I would not call them sin if they didn't have a destroying nature to them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be sin. I want the best for you, and so when you sin, you miss the mark of my best.
Yes.
I just thought of our
there's
next,
pleasure in sin, right? There's pleasure in it.
Another good title for a podcast, which I won't mention right now, but I'm going to tell you guys afterwards.
Okay.
I'll keep the people hanging.
You'll forget it.
I won't.
Okay.
I think another, I would say another thing that I think that leads to spiritual health also is looking out for others. Because like you said, sharing Christ's love. And I think if you're constantly, you might think you're spiritually healthy because you're going to all these Bible studies, you're doing all this stuff, you're, like Pastor said earlier, and you're ignoring your neighbor next door because he has a difference of belief, or, you're not helping people in need, or you don't have time for people. You might just need to just stop and take that in.
People think when you give your life over to God, you've got a killjoy.
Right.
And you don't. And I think if people really, really think, they're buying into things. I remember signing my first bodybuilding contract. And my agent, Marty, I talked about. Marty, we were talking one day, and I go, hey, I think I'll go snow skiing this weekend. And Marty goes, well, you need to read your contract. And I go, I think I've done that. He goes, well, if you're thinking about going snow skiing without asking me, you haven't read your contract, because you can't do anything that would jeopardize your health, because that means I don't make money.
Right.
And if you hurt yourself, then you owe me money. And I go, well, I didn't know that was in there.
I didn't know that was in there.
Yeah. And I was like, well, I'll get that out next time. But he's like, so you were not going to go snow skiing this weekend?
Isn't that one of the proponents?
Yeah.
One of the things that keeps us holy is that I see something out there and I go, man, I could get into that.
But that's not good.
But I know it's sin. I know it's bad. But in the back of my mind, I know what God's word teaches. If you get into that, at some point, it will bring death and destruction. I guarantee you. And just trusting God and going, you made me.
It's interesting to me that so many people know that darkness, and they know and would tell you the devil exists, but God, I'm not sure. How can the devil exist and God doesn't, right?
You owe it to yourself to find out if God exists. Find out if the message that we're talking about is the truth. I guarantee you, the Bible says, now it says it, if you seek for me with all your heart, you will find me. I will let you find me. Mm-hmm. And I read some stories, at least one last Sunday. Was it a week ago Sunday? I'm getting confused, whatever. But I read a story about a scientist in particular who wanted to prove God was real to himself. And he set out there and he did it. He did it in a certain way. These 21 scientists, they were not saved before they decided to take the same criteria they made everything else go through to prove it was real, and test God in that same way. And when they did, they found out he was real, and that he's the God of the Bible, that he'll talk to you, that he'll hear your prayers and answer them. I wish I could tell this God story. I can't, but I just had one last week.
Well, see, isn't that the exciting Pastor? That keeps our hope going, because it's every day, every week.
Every week.
It's one of those things, and I think this sums it up for me. You said that we hate religion, and we do, because religion is a set of rules.
Man-made rules.
Yes, man-made rules. You've always taught us that it's a relationship.
Well, what we hate,
Jesus.
What we hate and what we're rebellious against is man-made constructs.
Man-made rules.
Right?
Yeah, right.
For example, I was going to talk about some of the things that makes people not strong and healthy in the faith. And one of them is going to extremes. Let me talk about the rules we hate. One of them, it was a few decades ago, and the church became very self-righteous. And this was the church at large. It was a big denomination. And they said, we want everyone to stop going to Disneyland because they hire gay people. Don't go there anymore.
Wow.
And a lot of them started jumping on that bandwagon. And I thought, that's the thing I don't want a part of.
Yes.
None of
I don't
it.
want to be a part of that.
Nope.
That is ridiculous. Why don't you stop going to Walmart?
Right.
Stop going to Target? Stop.
Okay, I'll say it.
What?
The podcast or the next podcast one or title. Let's talk about God and politics.
God and politics.
Right? Religion
Oh,
and
my
politics.
goodness.
Let's
Will
talk
we
about
stir the
religion.
pot
Let's
there?
talk about religion and politics.
Religion and
I
politics.
have no
Well,
I have no
again,
problem doing that.
It'd be
let me-
good. It'd be
let me-
awesome.
let me say
because
this.
There's a reason
Okay,
behind it.
I want to hear where you're going because I love the train you're on with
really,
the Disneyland.
Here's the deal.
Yeah,
Here's the
sorry.
deal. When I gave my life to God and became a Christian, I said, now I got to get into a church. I looked over here and I see this religious right political church, and I go, I don't want to be a part of that.
Nope.
No way. I looked over to the Pentecostals who were doing all this goofy stuff. And I do goofy stuff today, but I hope it's balanced. And I go, man, they're as goofy as can be. I sure want to be a part of that. And I looked around, and I couldn't find that church that I thought I would be comfortable in this church. I spoke with one of our pastors, my son-in-law, Jim Cruz, who's a pastor at Thousand Oaks. And Valley always seems to be balanced. We're a little bit Pentecostal. We're a little bit conservative. We're a little bit liberal. We seem to fall in the middle of almost everything.
We're pro-human.
We are pro-human. Oh, you know what? I've got notes here that I wrote out I want to talk about. We're not even going to get to them. Again, there's another day, right?
Yeah,
Another week's podcast coming up.
absolutely.
And we're on the
Absolutely.
mountain. The snow is melting. It's up pretty high.
Yeah, it's fun.
Beautiful
Sun's
weather out there.
Beautiful, yeah.
Absolutely gorgeous
Yeah.
weather. So we're going to sign
Sun's
off
out, guns
today.
out, buddy.
What? Yeah. So, yeah. What's crazy, our Canadian listens, which there are some, it's
Yeah.
like, they're like, you're where? There's sun? It's
Right.
melting?
Oh, yeah, it's
Beautiful up here.
just a plane right away. So
I wish we could bring everybody in our listening audience up here, let them see what we see when we're talking to you. We're
maybe.
looking out at windows all around us.
maybe we can
mountains,
go to them, bring pictures. I don't
beautifully
know.
gorgeous.
But anyway, we love you guys. We really do. And,
We love you.
And I know that sounds hypocritical because we don't know all of you, but we love you because God loved us, and that's part of
Yes.
our belief. And so
You're our family.
absolutely, which means we would listen to all of you. So if you have any questions, if you don't believe in God, hit us up.
Okay, right there.
Talk to us.
What I want you to do, listen to me. That health, we did 2 health podcasts. And I want you to send in questions that you might have about health.
Yeah, and when we
or
say send in,
comments.
the best way to do that would probably be face.
So I'll tell you right now. So I did an intro for last week's
Okay,
podcast.
cool.
You know, I was going to, we decided to change it. So you can send your emails to tech@vbf.org. So
Okay.
tech, so TECH
Yep.
at vbf.org.
Okay.
Or you in the YouTube comments, leave them, and I'll be there checking.
And you
them for
can
guys.
email-
Say it one more time.
So-
they got a pencil and paper out.
So do you have your pencil and paper? So you can either leave YouTube comments. That's the simplest way. If you want to go right to our YouTube channel,
Okay.
subscribe if you like. You can leave the comments right there, or you can send an email to TECH@VBF, like VBFchurch.org. So
or you could also send them to Pastor Ron
there you go.
at vbf.org. And what we will do, if you're curious about some health issues that maybe we didn't answer, because I personally am a health nut, and I said before I'd be teaching at some college somewhere on health if I wasn't here. But what we'll try to do, if you send in comments or questions, we'll at the start of every podcast for the next few, if there's enough of them, we will answer one or take one right at the outset of the podcast. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess-
I'm in. Yeah.
Is this my podcast?
I guess
agree.
exactly.
It is.
I think what's funny about it is everyone tells you don't read the comments, but we do.
We do.
And we're not worried about it even
Yeah.
if you are negative, because we realize that there are reasons behind your reasons.
And if you're out there and you're enjoying this, please let us know, because we don't know who's listening. We don't know where you're at.
Yep.
And again, I try to answer all of my Facebook emails or whatever. I don't pay as close attention to the emails, but contact us and let us know you're out there and that you're a part of our listening audience.
Absolutely. So anyway,
Love you guys.
we will talk. We'll talk soon. Bye.
You got your mama's sunshine, you got your daddy's rain.